Hello and welcome back to today's video. In today's video, I am going to be discussing the 2024 United States Senate elections. I know we're still about 2 years out, but there's been a lot in the news, a lot online, a lot of talk about the polling, and a lot of candidates have already announced their campaigns, including Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Elissa Slotkin in Michigan for the Democratic side, Jim Banks in Indiana. And so now we're going to be taking a look at what the predictions are and how things are going to play out, how I think things are going to play out in 2024. So starting off with the safe states, we're going to start with the Republican Party here. And this is going to segue into something I want to talk about, Tennessee, Mississippi. It's an odd map, and the reason for that is because the Democrats are defending the vast majority, about 2/3 of the seats that are up for grabs are going to be held by Democrats, including 3 in states that Donald Trump carried by 8 or more points in 2020, and those 3 are Jon Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, and Joe Manchin in West Virginia. And I'll get more into that later. But then you also have Democrats defending seats in swing states, including 5 that Joe Biden won by under 5 points in 2020: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. And now taking a look at the safe Republican states. Now keep in mind, North Dakota was held by a Democrat going into 2018. In Missouri and Indiana, I'm throwing those in likely just because I believe those will be 14 percentage points, but by no means competitive. And I categorized Missouri as safe for 2022, but then it ended up being 13 points. So I believe Missouri, Indiana will be around 13 points, but they're not going to be competitive. Both of those seats were held by a Democrat going into the 2018 cycle. And now Texas is going to be a lean Republican state. And looking at Texas, Ted Cruz does not have the best approval rating, especially for a Republican in Texas. So I expect him to be reelected by around 2 to 3 points. But once again, I don't think his reelection is severely in doubt because the Democrats probably will not be able to put as many resources into Texas as they would had they not been defending as many seats as they are. And Florida, I'm categorizing that as likely Republican. I don't believe that Rick Scott is going to have the kind of victory that Marco Rubio had. I believe Rick Scott is probably going to win by around 5 to 7 points at most, just because he is not as popular as Marco Rubio, and Florida has a high proportion of elderly voters who tend to favor Medicare, Social Security, and with Rick Scott suggesting making cuts to those programs, that could potentially hurt that traditional base that tends to vote Republican and cause them to either stay at home or vote for a third party or the Democratic nominee. So I believe Rick Scott will win re-election, but probably only by around 5 to 7 points. And now we're already looking at the map, and the Republicans are sitting at 49 Senate seats here, just with seats that will only be somewhat contested. And now moving on to the Democratic side, California, Washington. California, Dianne Feinstein's retiring, but it's going to be a safe Democratic seat. Hawaii, safe Democratic seat. Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar is extremely popular, won re-election by 24 points in 2018. I believe she will win by at least 15 in 2024. Once again, safe Democratic seat. New York, Vermont, and Bernie Sanders is an independent from Vermont, but I still believe he will win re-election by a safe margin. Massachusetts, safe. Rhode Island, Connecticut, safe. New Jersey, once again, much like Missouri or Indiana, likely in the sense that the margin of victory is going to be less than 15 points, but it's not going to be competitive. Bob Menendez will win re-election. So likely, but not going to be competitive. Delaware, Maryland, both safe. And then Maine, Angus King is an independent who caucuses with the Democratic Party, and Maine is going to be a safe seat for Angus King, should he seek re-election, and I believe he will. And then moving on to Virginia and New Mexico, both of those are likely Democratic seats. Tim Kaine in Virginia and Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, I believe both of them will win by around 10 to 14 points, depending on who the Republican nominee is and how well Joe Biden performs in both of those states. But I have no doubt that both of them will win re-election. And now, moving on to the more competitive states. These are the 3 states where the Senate seats are held by Democrats in states that Donald Trump carried by 8 or more points in 2020, as well as the 5 seats that are held by Democrats in states that Joe Biden carried by under 5 points in 2020. In fact, all of these are carried by Biden, all of those 5 by under 3 points. The largest margin of victory would be in Nevada and Michigan with around 2 points in both of those states. And now Pennsylvania, Biden carried it by about 1.2 points in 2020. I believe Bob Casey, he said he's running for re-election, and I believe he will run for re-election. I believe that he will win his re-election campaign by around probably 7 to 9 points, although he could do better than that, but I don't believe his re-election is in doubt at all. He performed extremely well in the 2018 election, and given the fact that Josh Shapiro won by nearly 15 points in 2022, the governorship, and John Fetterman won the open Senate seat by almost 5 points in 2022, I have no doubt that Bob Casey will be reelected and that his reelection will be within that likely margin of victory range. And then moving on to Michigan. In Michigan, I'm going to put in the lean category just because Debbie Stabenow is retiring, leaving it as an open seat. However, I believe that Alyssa Slotkin, should she win the primary, will be a strong Democratic nominee and will be able to carry Michigan and probably outperform Biden in the state of Michigan. And now moving on to Wisconsin. Senator Tammy Baldwin, she was first elected in 2012, re-elected by around 10 points in 2018, and I believe that 2024, I'm going to categorize Wisconsin as lean Democratic. I don't believe it will be extremely competitive, but I believe it will definitely be in the top 5 for competitive races, in and out of the top 5, probably switching with Nevada. And I believe both parties are going to invest significant resources in Wisconsin to ensure that they get the best nominees for both sides. I believe Tammy Baldwin is going to seek re-election, and I believe if she does, I have no doubts that she'll be re-elected. But I do believe it will be a narrower margin because I believe the Republicans will do candidate recruitment, and also it's a presidential election year, meaning there'll be less ticket splitting. So I'm going to throw Wisconsin in the lean Democratic side simply because I believe it will be a more challenging re-election campaign for Tammy Baldwin, but I do believe she will win re-election. And Nevada, what's interesting about Nevada is you saw in 2022 the Republican gubernatorial nominee, Joe Lombardo, defeat incumbent Democrat Governor Steve Sisolak by a little bit over a point. At the same time, Republican Senate nominee Adam Laxalt was defeated by incumbent Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto by a little bit under a point. So you did see that ticket splitting in Nevada in 2022. Now, 2024, like I said, presidential election race, presidential election year, that is, and Joe Biden carried Nevada by around 2 in 2020. And I believe that he will help Jackie Rosen here, and rather than winning re-election by less than a point, I believe that Jackie Rosen will win her re-election campaign probably by a similar margin to Joe Biden's, so probably by around 2 points, maybe a little less than 2 points. And now moving on to Arizona, and this is where I want to get into the polling data. So first, I'm going to go to the 538 polling data here, and if you look at the polls from Arizona, you have a potential three-way race. You have Kyrsten Sinema, who is the current independent senator, former Democrat, first one in 2018, former congresswoman, and she's now an independent. She has filed the paperwork to run for re-election, but she has not said whether or not she will run for re-election. And you have both Karen Taylor Robson and Kari Lake, who both ran for governor on the Republican side. Kari Lake ended up being the nominee in 2022. Both of them have met with Steve Daines, who is the chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And then on the Democratic side, you have Ruben Gallego, who is a congressman from the Phoenix area and is progressive. He's also a veteran. And you look, this poll, it was funded by the Democratic Party, but you look, it's from January 18th to 23rd. Likely voters, and the thing about likely voters is likely voters tend to be more Republican-leaning than registered voters. And you look at a three-way race with Doug Ducey, and Gallego's up by 6, a three-way race with Kari Lake, and it's even, and a two-way race between Gallego and Kari Lake, and Gallego is up by 5. But then you move on to a poll that is from Ohio Predictive Insights, at least I'm assuming that's what the OH means. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments on that. But it's a neutral poll, and it's registered voters, which does tend to favor the Democratic Party. And you look at that, and you have Gallego plus 4 against Ducey, and Doug Ducey probably will not run. Gallego plus 4 against Karen Taylor Robson. Once again, she might run. Gallego plus 11 against Blake Masters. Gallego plus 10 against Kari Lake. And then in the three-way race, you don't have Sinema getting more than 25% of the vote in any scenario, and she takes a little bit more from the Democratic nominee than from the Republican nominee, but it's roughly even, and you have Gallego leading in all these polls. Now, like I said, just because these are registered voters, those polls, as we've seen in the past, tend to favor the Democratic nominee, just because Democrats have an edge in registered voters, whereas Republicans have an edge in likely voters. And that's just the way the polling is. So usually what I like to do is I'd like to cut that lead in half, maybe 2/3. But even with that, Gallego is still leading in all of these polls. And now if I'm going to look at 270 to win here, and you look, they have the same predictions that I do in the Rust Belt here. And I'm going to talk about West Virginia and Montana in a little bit. Obviously, I have Texas as being more competitive than they do, but largely the same. Arizona's a toss-up for 270 to win, and I will talk about this map in a little bit. And obviously, the Republicans only need 50 Senate seats if they win the presidency. They need 51 if they don't to retake the Senate. But now, looking at this map, my map where I have my prediction here, I'm going to categorize Arizona as lean Democratic right now. I don't believe it's a tilt state simply because you have the possible dynamic of a three-way race, and that's very complicated and very rare to see a tilt margin of victory less than 1 point when you have a three-way race. And looking at the polling data right now, I would categorize Arizona as lean Democratic. And now moving on to Ohio, and there hasn't been a ton of polling for Ohio. But once again, you see a situation where you have a Democrat who is running for re-election in a state that Donald Trump carried by 8 points in 2020. And that Democrat is Sherrod Brown. But the thing with Sherrod Brown is he won re-election in 2012, beat an incumbent Republican senator in 2006, and he also won re-election in 2018, and he outperformed Obama's margin of victory in 2012. So I'm going to categorize Ohio as tilt Democratic for now. because, once again, you have the same as 2022, where the Republican primary is shaping up to be rather bruising to the party. You saw it in Pennsylvania, where they lost. You saw it in Ohio in 2022, where J.D. Vance underperformed Trump in a year that was more favorable to Republicans. And plus, Sherrod Brown has a high approval rating and has the ability to connect with white working class voters who comprise a plurality in Ohio's electorate. So I believe that Sherrod Brown will win re-election, although I believe it will be a highly competitive race and somewhat dependent on who the Republican nominee is. And right now we have 49-49, 49 seats for the Republicans, 49 for the Democrats. And now I'm going to go back to the polling data to talk about Montana and West Virginia. So looking at West Virginia, this is a Republican-funded poll from the Senate Leadership Fund Super PAC, which I believe is connected to Republican Senator and Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell. And looking at the polling, you have Joe Manchin over 50%, both against Patrick Morrisey, the Attorney General of West Virginia, who Manchin defeated in 2018 by around 3 points, and against Alex Mooney, who is a current congressman from West Virginia. You have Manchin defeating Mooney by 15 and Manchin defeating Morrisey by 10. Now, obviously, these numbers will narrow up, but once again, this is a B-plus poll, likely voters, which tend to favor Republicans. Especially, this is interesting, considering that you look back to August of 2022, and all three of those candidates were leading against Manchin. But now you look early 2023, and Manchin leads against two of the three. The only candidate he is defeated by is Jim Justice, the current Republican governor of West Virginia, who also happens to be a former Democrat. And now Justice would be the strongest candidate for the Republicans to field in this race, without a doubt. And he has talked about running for Senate. However, he has not committed to running for Senate yet. And people are saying an announcement is pending, but then there's the question, as a former Democrat, can he get through the primary? But he also has a high approval rating, so there's a ton of different dynamics at work in this West Virginia Senate race. And now you look at 270 to win, and they have West Virginia as lean Republican. And I think that's a fair characterization for now. So given the fact that Jim Justice is considering a run, and the fact that he has a high approval rating and a somewhat significant chance of getting through the primary, I'm going to throw West Virginia in the lean Republican category for now, and that puts Republicans at 50. And now moving on to the final state, and that is Montana, where Democrat Jon Tester has announced that he is seeking re-election. And you look at the polling from a couple weeks ago, from February 1st, it was conducted over 2 days. There's no rating, it's just called the Political Company. You see Tester getting 45-46% against any of these candidates, Rosendale and Zinke, who are the two congressmen from the state of Montana, and tied with Greg Gianforte, who is the governor of Montana. And, you see Tester hovering at around 45%, and he has a 60% approval rating. But then you go up to this poll here, conducted with likely voters, B rating, BC rating, February 18th through 21st, and you have Rosendale, instead of losing to Tester by 5, you have him beating Tester by 5. And I think what you have in Montana is similar to what the case was in 2010 in North Dakota. In the Senate race in North Dakota in 2010, you had a Democratic senator, Byron Dorgan, who had a 60% approval rating. And the governor of North Dakota, John Hoeven, who is the current senator from North Dakota, one of the two current senators from North Dakota, ran against Byron Dorgan. And Byron Dorgan Byron Dorgan ended up not seeking re-election because despite the fact that he had a 60% approval rating, very similar to Jon Tester has about a 60% approval rating. And the polling showed that John Hoeven would still defeat Byron Dorgan by around 17 points, and Trump won Montana by around 15 points in 2020. And once again, presidential election year, so you have less ticket splitting. So looking at this, I think this is a very similar dynamic to that 2010 Senate race in North Dakota, where you have a popular Democratic incumbent just unable to overcome the partisan lean of the state. However, Matt Rosendale did lose to Jon Tester in 2018, so anything is possible. But for now, looking at 538, Montana is a toss-up. Jon Tester is running for re-election. But for right now, I am going to categorize Montana as lean Republican, simply because of that poll that just came out. Now that could change. Once the campaign season gets going, there might be a messy Republican primary that results in a damaged general election candidate or a general election candidate who can't win, much like you saw in Pennsylvania in 2022 for both the Senate race and the governor's race. But all in all, right now, I predict that the Republicans will retake the Senate in 2024, flipping the states of West Virginia and Montana, while the Democrats hold all of the other states that they currently hold, and the Republicans hold all of the other states that they currently hold, leaving the Senate with a 51-49 Republican majority, and categorizing all of the states as one solid color. You can see the 51-49 Republican majority in the Senate. Once again, the Republicans flipping the states of West Virginia and Montana to gain a 51-49 edge in the Senate, the Democrats holding Ohio and all of the other competitive states, and the Republicans holding Texas and Florida for their competitive states. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.